Hey, I am in the long process of moving and my recording studio is almost empty, so if this video sounds echoey or otherwise fucked up, I apologize. Adult Swim. What a network. You know, I grew up on Cartoon Network, so it's only natural that before long I got into Adult Swim. And I gotta say, I respect the hell out of it. Though I'm willing to admit many of my favorite Adult Swim shows tend to be the ones most people would not pick as their favorites. But there's actually one show on Adult Swim that I watched that I think is one of the greatest shows I've ever seen. One that left an impact on me after I finished watching it. I'm talking about Orel. There are many reviews of this one on YouTube. I can't say I'm the first. This ain't the life and times of Tim, I can't call dibs on this one. But one could still definitely call this show underrated. It doesn't seem to get talked about much, and a lot of people who did watch Adult Swim from that era barely remember it. But I'm here today to tell you that you should. It's been a long time since I've watched a cartoon worth remembering this much. This time around, I don't want to talk about it. I need to. So say your prayers, grab a drink or 10, and I'll see you in my study. I'm here to sing the praises of one of the absolute greatest shows I've ever had the pleasure of watching, Orel. Okay, so I usually post a brief, spoiler-free recommendation before moving on to the review, which contains spoilers. But this one is going to be really short because this is one of those shows you can't talk about too much without spoiling it. So here's what I'll divulge about it to those who haven't seen it. Orel is a stop-motion claymated cartoon that aired on Adult Swim from 2005 to 2008. It is a satire of fundamental Christianity. The show centers around Orel, a well-meaning kid who only wants to please God, but who takes the advice he is given by adults far too literally. His misadventures are generally centered around hypocrisy between what his religion preaches and the way he sees people practicing it. The town the show takes place in is Moralton, in the fictional state of Soda. Moralton is full of incredibly well-developed characters, most of whom start off simply as side characters. As a matter of fact, this series evolves from being completely satirical to becoming an incredibly layered show that has some episodes that aren't comedic at all. There were only 3 seasons. The first season is only 10 episodes and is formulaic but hilarious. Orel misinterprets a sermon he hears, usually to hilarious, disastrous effect, and is given the belt and scolded by his father, Clay, whose lessons are the wrong takeaways. The second season is 20 episodes long and continues Orel's misadventures, but also delves into how they affect the town, and how the town affects him. Minor subplots from the first season become major in this one. The side characters get fleshed out moments of their own, and Orel grows as a character. This season is definitely the funniest and feels the most well-rounded. The third season is 13 episodes long, 14 if you count the posthumous episode Abstinence, and is a story that rotates around the second season finale until the last 3 episodes. This season is about the unspooling of Moralton, centering on the breakdown or outright destruction of the private lives of many of the townsfolk. Although a lot of it is still comedic, there is a noticeable tonal shift, with some incredibly dark episodes and some that are barely comedic at all. The series was cancelled before the third season debuted, giving the creators time to tack on an ending for Orel, but not for the other characters. It's a good ending, but you can tell there was meant to be more show. Something I love about Orel is that it has a fucked up sense of humor. And I mean like, fucked up even for Adult Swim. Wildly fucked up. It's not afraid to make the kinds of jokes I love, which are also the kinds of jokes that terrify network TV executives and most of the general populace.
Kinda late to be selling children snack treats, don't you think, Mr. Creepler?
Never too late for a boy like Doughy.
Oh, thanks!
I couldn't take money, but you can have a free tour of the back of my ice cream van.
No thank you.
I know you're out with someone else. You keep turning me on.
I don't think a show like this could be made again now, and as I will reveal, a show like this apparently couldn't be made then either. Orel explores a lot of themes. Sort of like how Hey Arnold was funny but explored a lot of serious themes for kids, Orel is funny but explores a lot of serious themes for adults. And like Hey Arnold, it wasn't afraid to throw some heart-wrenching and heartwarming things into the mix. The show's biggest themes are fundamental religion, losing faith, and the generational cycle of violence. Moral Orel changes from season to season, and the end of the show will leave you feeling very different than the beginning. But one thing I love about the show is that even though it switches things up drastically, it does not retcon a single fucking thing that comes before it. I hate retconning in story-centered entertainment. Moral Orel keeps all of its continuity while changing structure and atmosphere, which is something I respect the hell out of. If you've never watched this show, the entire show is free on YouTube. The whole show! It is, at this current date, impossible to find the USA format DVDs of Moral Orel. You just gotta see it on YouTube. Moral Orel was created by Dino Stamatopoulos, who was a writer or consultant on a lot of fucking stuff. He wrote for Conan and Letterman, Tim and Eric, Ben Stiller and Dana Carvey, Mad TV, Community, and a bunch of other cartoons. The man had quite the resume, but Moral Orel was his big breakthrough as the actual creator of the show. It's surprisingly difficult to get a detailed background on the origin of Moral Orel. The closest thing I can find to its conception is that its aesthetic was inspired by 1950s family sitcoms and that the pilot was supposed to have Iggy Pop involved in some way. According to Dino, it was not heavily inspired by stop-motion Christian show Davey and Goliath. There was a hefty writing team behind Moral Orel, and it needed it for the absolute circles you'll see in Season 3. Some standouts aside from Dino include Scott Adsit, Jay Johnston, and Chris McKay, who also directed a good chunk of the show. The voice actors in Moral Orel are very talented, and includes Carolyn Lawrence as Orel. You can hear hints of Jimmy Neutron in her voice, Scott Adsit as Clay and Doey, Britta Phillips as Blaberta, Stephanie, and Nurse Bendy, Jay Johnston as Coach Stopframe, Joe, and Miss Censordoll, and William Salyers as Reverend Putty. Pretty small cast for all those voices. Moral Orel was made using stop motion on clay models. A lot of the characters' names reference this. Stop motion, for those of you who don't know, is very painstaking and time consuming, and it looks really good for a network show. Not only that, but this show has real cinematography, brought to you by excellent cinematographer Jeff Gardner. Sometimes a camera will be point of view or follow a character around like in a live action movie. I don't know how they did this with miniature models, but it looks awesome. Alright, we're entering spoiler territory now. So go watch Moral Orel, then report back to me. Took you fucking long enough. Moralton is a small town where almost everyone is a fundamental Christian and where there is one non-mainline Protestant church of unnamed denomination. And it's a horrible place. Moralton is definitely modeled after real-life, small religious communities in America, but I assume is significantly exaggerated. The people of Moralton are generally the worst kind of religious people. Well, not the worst, but they're pretty bad. They're the judgy, belief-pushing type of religious people who are immune to reason. A mild example of this is when the Puppingtons and Posabules stop talking to each other because of a difference in the Lord's Prayer. An extreme example of this is when the local hospital doesn't treat a man's severe wound because it looks like the image of Jesus. But there is something I noticed while watching the show that elevates Moralton from a simple parody of religious mania into something more interesting and sinister. It's all a facade. The residents of Moralton are fundamental Christians, but not practicing Christians. Now, this is not true for every character. Orel is absolutely a practicing Christian. The way he practices it is fucking horrifying, but he does follow what he thinks pleases God based on the information he's given. Minus the Halloween episode, but he was doing all that stuff just to feel scared. But most of the people in Moralton are not pious. They're not kind. They're not forgiving. They're not understanding. They're not Christ-like. They cheat on their spouses, they indulge their addictions, they ignore, abuse, or otherwise don't love their children. Some of them are power-hungry monsters, and they're not sorry for it, which is the gravest sin of all. They don't have a confessional in Moralton. They have a repressional. That is not how Christianity works. I'm not religious, but I do know that a huge part of Christianity is knowing you did wrong and saying you're sorry. Most of the people in this town are immoral. Some know that other people are just as immoral as they are, and yet no one ever just decides to drop the facade. Out and about, they still feel the need to pretend that they're Christians. Being able to convey this subtlety without ever just coming out and saying it is incredible writing. So now, I'd like to talk about the characters in Moral Orel. Now, this show, for as short a runtime as it had, has a lot of characters, and most of them are real, fleshed out characters who are given a lot of attention. So to talk about every character in the show in detail would take all day. I'm going to try and do my best, but if you want a detailed character analysis of all of these characters, there are many videos on YouTube dedicated to each of them. I'm just going to touch briefly on the characters who I like the most or have something to say about. First, let's talk about Orel. Orel, to his credit, is the closest any character in Moralton comes to actually being moral. He's also the most innocent, which is frightening because this kid is a fucking terror. Orel is like a religious Amelia Bedelia. He takes every piece of advice given to him literally, and the results are fucking disastrous. Now, it is true that this stems from Orel's lack of any real guidance. No adult in the show teaches Orel properly about God or life in general. But he still has a learning disability that has gotten people killed, pregnant, caused a zombie uprising. He almost murdered his brother. I'm not sure if just teaching him properly is the answer. Orel needs to be committed somewhere. But despite all the horrible things he's done, Orel does not have an ounce of malice in him. He's gullible and literal because he has bad guidance. Before Orel actually did a great job giving an explanation for why he is the way he is. He was always gullible, but Clay used God as an answer to every question he asked. And now Clay, the show's antagonist. The abusive, alcoholic father and emotionally absent husband that has been lauded as one of the greatest villains in cartoon history. I would like to point out that Clay is not the most sinister or evil character on the show, but I think Clay is so interesting because he's a very realistic villain. I'm sure at least one of you watching this right now was unfortunate enough to have a dad like Clay. Clay is a self-loathing alcoholic, but it's not just himself he loathes his family too. The only person he doesn't loathe is his forbidden crush, Coach Stopframe. However, this relationship pales in comparison to the one he has with liquor. Alcohol is Clay's greatest love of all. It's more his religion than Christianity ever was. Clay is absolutely the most well-written character on the show. There are many windows provided into his life and how he turned out the way he did. I'm at the age now where I do sympathize with some aspects of Clay's personality. I feel for people who are at a point where they made unfixable choices and never got to be who they wanted to be. Self-loathing causes depression, which leads to a lot of the things Clay does in the show, including hurting people he's supposed to love and protect. But that certainly doesn't fucking excuse it. And in the end, he's a grown man capable of making his own decisions. And he is to blame for the decisions he makes. YouTubers tend to paint Clay as this ultimate evil in Moralton. After all, the main character is his son, whom he guides down the wrong path time and time again. Plus, he's the mayor. Love that reveal, by the way. However, there are other characters on the show that I absolutely believe are more evil than Clay. And I'm not even going to count Mr. Krabler because he's barely in the show. It may shock some of you to know that one of the characters I think is more evil than Clay is Blabberta. Blabberta is an emotionally absent mother with near debilitating OCD, trapped in an unloving marriage that she put herself in. Blabberta gave Clay his first drink, then manipulated him into marrying her in the midst of his first hangover. She did this to escape a berating family and because all her friends were getting married. So because of that, she trapped herself and the unwitting Clay into something neither of them were prepared for. Blabberta now spends her time trying to find someone who loves her the way Clay won't, while ignoring her 2 children who she should be loving. She could have left her abusive alcoholic husband with the children at any time, but never did. All for the sake of appearance. Let's talk a little bit about Coach Stopframe. He's in love with Clay and had an affair with Blabberta, impregnating her with Shapey, all in an attempt to get closer to Clay. Now that is incredibly fucked up. But so is the other stuff he does, like nearly killing the Figarellis, and Orel. He's significantly less religious than the other townspeople, even turning to Satanism in an attempt to woo Clay. But at the end of the show, he actually grows to like Orel. I'd like to point out that this doesn't redeem all that he's done. He's still a massive piece of shit. Hell, he's probably worse than Clay too. So yeah, if you ask me, Clay's wife and his love interest are both more evil than he is. But the character that I think is supposed to be the most evil on the show is none other than Miss Censordoll. Clay and Blabberta are complicated villains, and we love them for it. But Miss Censordoll is a classic villain, and we love her for it. The town's book-burning librarian and the de facto head of censorship and cancel culture in Moralton, the show's only power-hungry megalomaniac, Miss Censordoll is a supervillain. She is sinister every moment she is on screen, and everything we find out about her is more and more sinister. Her obsession with eggs that stems from her ovary removal has given her a Virgin Mary complex. She wants to be the town's dark mother, and this is a concept that I think would have definitely been expanded on in future episodes. There is actually some insight into what they would have done with this character in future seasons, but I'm gonna save that for later. So, we've talked a whole lot about the evil characters on this show, so now, as a palate cleanser, I'd like to discuss one of the few adult characters with redeeming qualities. My favorite character on the show, Reverend Putty. Just as Clay and Blabberta are complex bad, Putty is complex good. He does fall into the same failings the rest of the town does pretty often, including failing at teaching Orel. But at his heart, Putty is a good person. He does actually believe in what he's saying in church. He also has trouble practicing it, but understands that he has trouble practicing it. A big driving force of his character is getting laid and finding romantic love, things Blabberta also craves. But unlike Blabberta, who takes no solace in the familial love sitting right in front of her face, Putty does take solace in his own daughter, whom he has a real loving relationship with. He has a conscience, and his repressional that works so well for others never works on him. He is also, in my humble opinion, the absolute funniest character on this show. His sermons are fucking hilarious. Especially after Orel accidentally helps him lose his virginity and he's up there smoking a cigarette.
So what I'm saying is, brothers and sisters, sure, be a good Christian, but don't rush it. You gotta play it cool. Pace yourself if you want to last all night. Maybe even play a little hard to get. Let Jesus into your heart gradually, but pull back right before you reach complete spiritual satisfaction. Trust me, it'll drive him 2 words: crazy. This guy knows what I'm talking about, right, Chief? Ooh, hey, I gotta fly, so, amen.
Putty probably has the most character development over the course of the series, and I'm all about it. He's probably the only character other than Orel who really learns anything about himself. Doey is Orel's best friend, and I feel really bad for this kid. He has it almost as bad as Orel, with 2 college-aged parents who give 0 fucks about him. I love the one episode where Clay makes Orel jealous by getting closer to Doey, only to just discard him when Orel learns how to shoot. Also the abstinence episode when he becomes a clock-blocking superhero. There are plenty more side characters in this show that I like. The Jews for Jesus always crack me up. Mr. Figarelli and Stephanie are great. I like Doey's parents. I mean, honestly, there's a reason there are whole YouTube videos devoted to each character in this show. There are so many of them. Moralton is up there with South Park and Springfield in how many memorable characters it has, but it did that in only 3 years. Alright, my brief thoughts on each season and some favorite episodes in each. Season 1 of Moral Orel is great. Thing is, I don't have much to say about it. It's fucking hilarious, but formulaic, not that there's anything wrong with the formula. And everything I really had to say about it, I said in the beginning of this video. It absolutely has highlights, though. One of my favorites is God's Chef, the one where he impregnates all the women in town as a loophole so he can jack off with impunity. God-fearing is the one where he breaks all the commandments up to and including "Thou shalt not kill" just for a Halloween scare, then learns that God himself is the scariest monster of all.
But he's God, Reverend. Isn't everything he does good?
No, not by a long shot.
Season 2 is probably my favorite season. I mean, whether Season 2 or 3 is your favorite season depends on what you're looking for. Season 2 is, overall, the best representation of the show as a whole, though. Funniest season? Check. Season where we really get to know the townsfolk intimately? Check. In this season, we start to really see Orel's relationship with Moralton, how the things he does affect the town, and vice versa. In a lot of ways, he and the town are enemies in this season. There are tons of highlights in this one. In God's Image is the one where Orel segregates the Figarellis into special treatment.
All our lives we've worked and slaved to keep them from humiliating us. And this is what we get? A bunch of figure lovers!
God's Blunders is the one where Tommy is so smart he gets labeled special ed.
Now, moronic is a harsh word and not socially acceptable anymore. We prefer to call your son retarded.
Pleasure, the one where Orel unwittingly gets into S&M.
You see, Orel, here at the Glory Hallelujah Hole, we combine pain and pleasure to create a whole new thing we call pleasure.
Be Fruitful and Multiply, the one where Reverend Putty learns that Stephanie is his daughter. Geniuses, in which the missing link is discovered, then becomes a conservative talk show host. This episode also has the most horrifying ending of any episode. Courtship, the one where Doey falls in love with Miss Sculptham and Mr. Creepler falls in love with Doey. School Pageant, with that catchy fucking song.
I hate you, Jesus, you rotten little fink. Your sermon never pleases and your parables all stink. Your eyes are beating noses, weird a goofy basket case. I'd like to take your stupid beard and rip it off your face.
And of course, Nature, the episode that most people point to as the turning point of the show, and most people's favorite. Nature has been talked about to death, but I will say it was very ballsy of Dino and the team to delve into territory like this at this point in the show. My favorite moment in the episode is when Orel lies to Clay and tells him he didn't shoot the bear, because he knows it would make his father proud and he doesn't want him to have the satisfaction. It's a great fuck you moment. Season 3's structure is nothing short of fascinating. The entire season, up until the final 3 episodes, revolves around events happening before or during the hunting trip in the Season 2 finale, with the last 3 episodes finally picking up the aftermath. This season has the most cohesive and thought-out storyline of the show, with each episode really riding off the one before it. It is also the season that the show has become most known for. Season 3 of Moral Orel is one of the darkest seasons of any cartoon, ever. And cinematically, Dino and the guys pulled out all the stops. There is real movie-style camera work in this season. The mountain goats are edited in perfectly all over the place. They were becoming masters of the game. So how about some favorites? Alone. Easily the darkest episode of the show, and infamously the one that got it canceled. From Adult Swim. Do you know how fucked up something needs to be to get canceled from Adult Swim? Yes, this is the one where Miss Sculptham had to abort a grape baby. Trigger. Doey gets played by Clay in one of the funniest moments of the season. Close Face. My favorite episode of the show. The one where Stephanie helps Orel reunite with Christina, and where Stephanie learns a little something about her father and her own past she never knew. It's not that funny, and it's not that dark. More than anything, it's heartwarming. It's like something straight out of Hey Arnold. Sundays, in which Reverend Putty learns the most about himself and his love problems, coming to understand regret. Sacrifice, one of Clay's biggest moments. That monologue of his being one of the moments that makes the show.
And you realize, all too soon, that you're not good enough. That maybe there was a jerk-off called Darwin after all. And that you never acknowledged his existence because you knew deep inside that you were really what you feared you were. Weak and passive and ultimately broken by the ones who were made the fittest. And that through your weaknesses you built up a poison that poisoned others around you. That you loved.
So after the premiere of Alone, Adult Swim canceled the series, but they let them finish out Season 3. It is very obvious there was a lot of story left to tell, but they did tack on a happy ending for Orel, which I appreciated. There was the posthumous episode Abstinence that members of the team made in a sort of rough homemade way for the fans. This is more or less a part of Season 3. Before Orel was also a pretty good prequel short. It really does give background to why Orel is the way he is. Not sure why they changed his grandfather's entire accent, though. Oh, and Orel's grandpa would have been a big part of Season 4. Apparently, he spends most of the season dying in Orel's house. There were episodes of Moral Orel which were never aired, but the scripts were leaked. If you're a fan of the show, I encourage you to read them if you haven't. They're really good. One of them, called Narcissism, is a follow-up to Sundays, in which my man, Reverend Putty, slings that dick all over town, but can't get a certain someone out of his head. Yes, he begins to fall for Florence. The man who just wanted to get laid is suddenly tired of meaningless sex, and of course, seeks advice from the person closest to him. The other one, Raped, is a follow-up to Miss Sculptham's story in Alone, and if that episode hadn't gotten the show cancelled, this one certainly would have. The script to this episode is one of the funniest and most fucked up things I've ever read. I dare say it's more fucked up than any part of the show that actually aired. You may recall Miss Sculptham had some mixed feelings about Mr. Creepler. Feelings you shouldn't have about someone who does that to you. Well, she ends up falling in love with Mr. Creepler's similar tendencied best friend. If you love this show, please read the script to this one, you'll thank me later. Over the course of watching Moral Orel, I've developed two theories about the show. The first is somewhat obvious, and other people have brought it up too. The second is mine all mine. First, some background. Although we are shown Orel's ultimate conclusion, unfortunately, we'll never know exactly how he got there. There were supposed to be 2 more seasons, and I have no doubt that there would have been more character development for him. But at least he had an ending, which no other character in Moralton got. And the character I think who was hurt the most by the show ending early was Clay. He's viewed as the main antagonist of the show, and for the 3 seasons we have to work with, he certainly is. But what if he wasn't supposed to be overall? By the end of the 3rd season, it's fairly obvious they were setting Miss Censordoll up to be the big bad of the entire show. And she would have been a good one. Here's where my theory picks up. Clay is an abusive father and an alcoholic, and he's definitely the main antagonist in Orel's world. But only Orel fears him. All of Moralton fears Censordoll. She is the most sinister character on the show, and by the end of the show we got, Clay is in her pocket, which could be disastrous. That was definitely going to pop off at some point. According to the Moral Orel wiki page on Miss Censordoll, Dino did confirm this on the commentary of one of those out-of-print DVDs I mentioned. Now here's the part that is my theory. Censordoll's need to control Moralton would bring her to do battle with the chief religious leader for the fate of the town, Reverend Putty. The town becomes divided and Clay is caught in the middle, but Orel hates him and is still siding with Censordoll. And I think there may have been a redemption arc planned for Clay. I think maybe, just maybe, this person we've seen play out as a monster may have turned on Censordoll to save his own son, and in the process, the town. We'll never know for sure, but I could have seen the series veering into that direction. After all, Orel does have his parents' picture up at the end. I have another different theory about the show too. This one is a little more abstract. What if Orel was the instrument of God's wrath unleashed on Moralton? In the Bible, when a place is led astray from God's word, he punishes it by,
fire, plague, oils,
Say, I think I'll go and paint the lawn.
the dead rising up, and locusts.
Oh, hiya, little cricket.
and all that happens in Moralton because at its heart, Moralton is Sodom and Gomorrah. Or think of it as one of the Old Testament high places, generations past its prime, corrupted, rife with sin. Moralton is kinda like Judah and Israel in the books of Kings and Chronicles. A place that at some point was holy, but where now the Lord's name is taken in vain. A shallow cultural emblem to hide behind, rather than something to truly believe in. Orel, being a true believer in God, could have been his instrument by which to deliver his plagues. Reverend Putty almost had it when he thought their misinstructions to Orel were causing God's wrath. But he put the blame on the town's failure to teach Orel properly, not on the town's inability to turn away from sin. I've saved this part for last. Moral Orel is a morally deep show. There are so many deep dives you could take with the themes and motifs in this show that you could drown. So I'll be in the kiddie pool, waiting. I can't salvage that, can I? The most obvious theme running through the show, really the reason for the show, is fundamental religion. The show exists as a parody of Christian fundamentalism, and I don't think I need to explain more of this. But as I said before, that interesting thing is the way the show frames the facade. The truth is that Christianity is not most of these people's true religion. Clay's religion is alcohol, Nurse Bendy's religion is a normal family. Miss Censordoll's religion is eggs. Most of these characters don't practice what they preach, which is pretty shitty of them for how hard they preach it. Orel may make disastrous mistakes, and yes, I do think he has a mental problem and needs to be in a controlled environment, but the kid is the only person in Moralton who actually does put God first. Another theme is the familial cycles of violence and depression and the concept of setting future generations up for failure. Orel is completely set up for failure. For all intents and purposes, this kid doesn't stand a chance. But in the end, he defies all expectations and becomes a loving father and husband. This show gets a lot of flack for being dark, but Orel getting this ending is proof that the creators had some plan in those final 2 seasons to bring it full circle. The last big theme I'd like to talk about is losing faith. The hunting trip is a pivotal moment where Orel begins to lose his faith in his father, and, although not explicitly stated, in his religion, in everything he was taught. Speaking as a person who was once religious and now isn't, I can tell you that losing your faith is an awful experience. For me, it started a chain reaction in which I lost faith in everyone and everything around me, including myself. And so I really felt for Orel after that moment and in the final episodes of the show. But there's a happy ending to this, one that actually made me smile. In the final shot of the show, there is a cross on the wall of Orel's home, which means that somewhere along the line, Orel regained his faith. Now, we'll never know what happened in between this moment and this one, but I'd like to think maybe, in those unmade final 2 seasons, something happened that made Orel regain his faith, and regain it in a way that made sense to him, with no lost commandments and no facade. Maybe something happened to him that people like us are waiting for. Maybe it's the thing that keeps us locked in for good. This ending gives me hope that it's gotta be out there somewhere. And you can't have faith without first having hope. Yeah, it's good TV. Guys, thanks for watching, and please bear with me during this move. Updates will be thin until August. Keep the likes and subscribes coming, and don't forget to check out the Patreon link in the description.
I hate you, Jesus!
You rotten little fink.
Your sermon never pleases.
And your parables all stink.
Your eyes are beady noses wear a goofy basket case.
I'd like to take your stupid beard and rip it off your face.
Prancing gaily on the water, a long-haired scrawny clod. You may be someone's daughter, but you sure ain't the son of God.
God, I hate you, Jesus, with your boring miracles. You smell like 100 cheeses have been shoved right up, shoved right up, shoved right up my nose. Wow, everyone sure hates Jesus. Whoops.